It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed for David Rodriguez. He was sitting in his law office in downtown San Francisco, going through immigration papers like any other day. The coffee was getting cold, and he was thinking about lunch, when his phone rang. "David, you need to get to Golden Gate Park right now," his boss said, sounding stressed. "There's been some kind of emergency landing, and they need someone who knows international law." David grabbed his briefcase and ran to his car. As he drove through the city, he could see helicopters circling the park. Police cars blocked every entrance. This wasn't just any emergency. When he arrived at the park, David couldn't believe his eyes. A massive silver ship, shaped like a giant teardrop, sat in the middle of the grass. It was beautiful, but completely alien. Around it, military personnel, and scientists were setting up equipment. Government officials in dark suits were talking in hushed voices. "You must be Rodriguez." A woman in a Navy uniform approached him. "I'm Captain Williams. We need your help with this situation." David stared at the ship. "Is this really what I think it is?" "Yes. It's an alien vessel. They're called Zephyrians, and they've been our diplomatic partners for 5 years now. Their ship had engine trouble, so they made an emergency landing here." David had heard about the Zephyrians on the news. 5 years ago, when they first made contact with Earth, it was the biggest story in human history. These aliens looked somewhat like humans, but were taller, with pale blue skin and silver eyes. They were peaceful and wanted to trade knowledge and technology. "Why do you need me?" David asked. Captain Williams pointed to the ship. "Their consul is on board with his 3 granddaughters. They're traveling back to their home planet, but now they're stuck here. We need someone who understands both human and alien law to handle the paperwork." David nodded. This was the chance of a lifetime. He had studied interspecies law in college, never thinking he'd actually use it. As they walked toward the ship, a door opened with a soft hissing sound. 3 figures stepped out, and David's breath caught in his throat. The Zephyrian granddaughters were unlike anything he had ever seen. They moved with grace, their silver eyes curious as they looked around at the human world. The first one was tall and elegant, with long silver hair that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. The second had shorter hair and carried what looked like scientific equipment. The third was smaller than the others, with kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Behind them came an older Zephyrian, clearly their grandfather. He wore robes that looked both ancient and futuristic. This had to be the consul. "Welcome to Earth," Captain Williams said formally. "We're here to help with your emergency." The consul spoke in his own language, and a human translator stepped forward. "He says thank you for your assistance. He wants to begin the formal emergency protocols." David was handed a tablet with several documents. "These are standard emergency assistance forms," the translator explained. "Just sign where indicated, and we can begin helping them repair their ship." David looked at the documents. They were written in both English and Zephyrian script. The English part seemed straightforward, just agreeing to provide emergency assistance to stranded diplomatic travelers. He had signed similar forms before for human refugees and immigrants. Without thinking too much about it, David signed his name at the bottom of each page. The translator took the tablet and showed it to the consul. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. The 3 granddaughters looked at the tablet, then at David, and their expressions changed completely. They began talking excitedly in their own language. The consul's eyes widened, and he looked at David with what seemed like surprise and approval. "What's happening?" David asked the translator. The translator looked confused and started speaking rapidly with the consul in Zephyrian. After a few minutes of back-and-forth conversation, the translator's face went pale. "Oh no," the translator whispered. "I think we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Captain Williams demanded. The translator took a deep breath. "There's been a translation error. In Zephyrian culture, when someone signs a formal document in the presence of unmarried women of the consul's family, It's considered a bonding declaration. David felt his stomach drop. A what? A marriage proposal, the translator said quietly. And according to their customs, the women have just accepted. David looked at the three Zephyrian women, who were now looking at him with what he could only describe as polite interest. They had no idea he hadn't meant to propose to them. To them, this human man had just formally asked to become their husband, and they had graciously accepted. This can't be happening, David said, running his hands through his hair. I was just signing emergency assistance papers. The consul approached David and spoke directly to him. The translator quickly interpreted. He says he's honored that a human man of such standing wants to join his family. He's pleased that his granddaughters will have someone to protect them during their extended stay on Earth. Extended stay? Captain Williams asked. The translator spoke with the ship's engineer, then turned back to them. Their ship needs parts. That will take months to manufacture. They'll be staying on Earth much longer than planned. David felt like the world was spinning around him. In the space of 10 minutes, he had gone from being a simple immigration lawyer to being engaged to 3 alien women he had never even spoken to. The granddaughters seemed to sense his confusion. The tallest one stepped forward and spoke in careful English. I am Lyra. These are my sisters Nova and Celeste. We understand this is unexpected for you. Her voice was musical, with an accent David couldn't place. Despite the impossible situation, he found himself oddly calmed by her presence. No human customs are different from ours, Nova added, her English also accented but clear. We can discuss this properly. Celeste, the youngest-looking of the 3, smiled gently. Perhaps we can find a solution that honors both our peoples. David looked around at the military officials, the scientists, and the translator, all staring at him. The media helicopters circled overhead. This wasn't just his problem anymore. This was about to become an international incident. What happens if I say this was all a mistake? David asked the translator. The translator spoke with the consul again, then shook his head grimly. Breaking an accepted bonding declaration would be considered a grave insult to their family and their entire people. It could damage relations between Earth and the Zephyrian Alliance. Captain Williams pulled David aside. Rodriguez, I know this is crazy, but we need to handle this carefully. The peace treaty with the Zephyrians is still new. We can't afford to mess this up. David looked back at the 3 women who were waiting patiently for his response. They didn't look upset or demanding. If anything, they seemed as surprised by this turn of events as he was. So what do I do? David asked, though he was starting to suspect he already knew the answer. The translator spoke with the consul one more time, then returned. He suggests that you all take time to get to know each other while the legal experts figure out how to handle this situation. In the meantime, the bonding declaration stands. As David drove home that evening, his mind was racing. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, government officials, and his own family all wanted to know what was happening. The story was already on the news. Local lawyer accidentally proposes to alien diplomats. He pulled into his driveway and sat in his car for a moment, trying to process the day's events. This morning, he had been a normal guy with a normal job. Now, he was at the center of the most unusual legal case in human history. His phone buzzed with a text from Captain Williams. Meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss next steps. Bring a lawyer. You're going to need one. David laughed despite himself. He was a lawyer, but he was pretty sure he needed someone who specialized in something a lot more complicated than immigration law. As he walked to his front door, David wondered what tomorrow would bring. One thing was certain. His quiet life in San Francisco was about to become very interesting. The federal courthouse in San Francisco had never seen anything like this before. David sat at a wooden table, surrounded by 3 of the best lawyers money could buy. Across from him sat Lyra, Nova, and Celeste, with their own legal team. The Consul sat in the gallery, watching everything with careful eyes. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a reputation for handling the most complex cases in the country. But even she looked uncertain as she settled into her chair. "This is certainly a first for me," Judge Morrison said, looking at the papers in front of her. "We're here to determine whether an accidental marriage contract between a human citizen and 3 Zephyrian nationals is legally binding." David's lead lawyer, Robert Chen, stood up. He was the kind of lawyer who wore expensive suits and never lost a case. "Your Honor, my client clearly had no intention of entering into any kind of marriage contract. This was a simple translation error." The Zephyrian legal representative, a tall woman named Ambassador Kira, responded in perfect English. "Your Honor, intention is not relevant under Zephyrian law. The formal bonding declaration was made in the proper circumstances, witnessed by the appropriate parties, and accepted according to our customs." Judge Morrison rubbed her temples. "Let me understand this correctly. Mr. Rodriguez signed what he thought were emergency assistance papers, but they were actually marriage documents?" "That's correct, Your Honor," Robert said. "The translator made a critical error. My client was simply trying to help stranded travelers." Ambassador Kira stood again. The documents were correctly translated into English. However, the act of signing them in the presence of unmarried women of the consul's family carries additional meaning in our culture. This meaning was explained in the cultural briefing documents that all Earth officials received 5 years ago. David felt his heart sink. He remembered getting those briefing documents when the Zephyrians first made contact, but who actually reads government paperwork that thoroughly? Judge Morrison looked through a thick folder. "It says here that breaking a formal bonding declaration would constitute a violation of the Treaty of Cosmic Cooperation. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ambassador Kira confirmed. "Article 7, Section 3 specifically states that marriage contracts between species must be honored to maintain diplomatic relations." Robert jumped up. "But, Your Honor, that treaty was written to prevent forced marriages, not to create them." "Actually," Judge Morrison said, reading from another document, "the treaty was written to ensure that cultural practices of both species are respected in interspecies relationships." David looked over at Lyra, Nova, and Celeste. They sat quietly, occasionally whispering to each other in their own language. They didn't look angry or upset. If anything, they seemed curious about the whole process. The judge called a brief recess, and David found himself alone with his legal team in a small conference room. "How bad is this?" David asked. Robert loosened his tie. "Honestly, pretty bad. The treaty is clear and the Zephyrian government is taking this seriously. If we push too hard to break this contract, it could damage relations between our entire planet and theirs. So, what are my options?" "Well," Robert said slowly, "we could argue that the marriage is invalid because you didn't understand what you were signing. But that might imply that Earth's diplomatic corps is incompetent." David's second lawyer, Patricia Wells, spoke up. "Or we could try to find a compromise, something that satisfies Zephyrian law without forcing you into a marriage you never wanted." When court resumed, things got even more complicated. The judge called in expert witnesses to explain both human and Zephyrian marriage customs. Dr. Helen Park, a professor of xenoanthropology, explained Zephyrian culture to the court. For Zephyrians, marriage is primarily an intellectual and social partnership. Romance, as humans understand it, is not a requirement. They often have multiple marriage partners, and these relationships are based on mutual respect and shared goals. David felt his face get hot. The idea of multiple wives was completely foreign to him, and he could see reporters in the gallery taking notes. The next witness was Dr. James Wilson, an expert on interspecies law. The Treaty of Cosmic Cooperation was designed to prevent exactly this kind of cultural misunderstanding. However, now that the misunderstanding has occurred, the treaty actually requires us to honor it. Judge Morrison listened carefully to all the testimony. Then she called a lunch break. David walked outside the courthouse and was immediately surrounded by reporters. Camera crews pushed forward, and microphones were shoved in his face. "Mr. Rodriguez, how do you feel about marrying 3 alien women? Is this the future of human-alien relations? What do your parents think about this situation?" David pushed through the crowd without answering. He needed space to think. This whole thing was becoming a media circus. He found a quiet coffee shop a few blocks away and sat down with his phone. He had 17 missed calls from his mother, 42 text messages from friends, and hundreds of emails from strangers around the world. One email caught his attention. It was from Lyra. "Dear David," it read, "I know this situation is difficult for you. It is difficult for us too. We never expected to be married to someone we barely know, especially someone from a different planet. But perhaps we can meet and talk about this like reasonable people. We are staying at the Zephyrian Cultural Center downtown. Would you like to have dinner with us tonight?" Lyra. David stared at the email. In all the legal chaos, he had forgotten that there were real people involved in this situation. 3 women who were just as confused and trapped as he was. That evening, David drove to the Zephyrian Cultural Center. It was a beautiful building that looked like a mix between a modern art museum and something from a science fiction movie. Inside, everything was clean and bright, with soft lighting that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Lyra met him at the entrance. Up close, she was even more striking than he remembered. Her silver eyes seemed to sparkle with intelligence. And when she smiled, David felt some of his nervousness fade away. "Thank you for coming," she said. "My sisters are preparing dinner. We thought it would be good to talk away from all the lawyers and reporters." David followed her through the building to a comfortable living area. Nova and Celeste were setting a table with both human and Zephyrian food. The smell was amazing, like nothing David had ever experienced before. "We know this is strange for you," Nova said as they sat down to eat. "It's strange for us, too. On our planet, bonding declarations are usually made after months of getting to know each other." Celeste added, "But we're not angry about the mistake. We understand that your customs are different from ours." David took a bite of the Zephyrian food. It tasted like a combination of fruits and spices that didn't exist on Earth. "What happens if we go through with this? I mean, what would a marriage between us actually look like?" Lyra thought for a moment. "In our culture, married partners support each other's goals and interests. We share knowledge and resources. We become family." "But not necessarily romantic partners?" David asked. "That can develop over time, or it might not," Nova explained. "For us, the intellectual and emotional connection is more important than physical attraction." David found himself relaxing for the first time in days. These women weren't trying to trap him or take advantage of him. They were just trying to make the best of an impossible situation. "What do you do back on your planet?" David asked. Lyra's eyes lit up. "I'm a quantum physicist. I study how energy moves through different dimensions." Nova smiled. "I work with biological systems. I design ways to help different species adapt to new environments." Celeste looked a bit shy. "I study cultures and languages. I help different species understand each other." David realized that these weren't just random alien women. They were brilliant scientists and scholars. The idea of learning from them was actually exciting. "What about you?" Lyra asked. "What kind of law do you practice?" "Immigration law, mostly," David said. "I help people who come to America from other countries navigate the legal system." Nova looked interested. "So you help beings adapt to new cultures?" "That's similar to what I do, but with biology instead of law." As the evening went on, David found himself enjoying their company. They were funny, intelligent, and genuinely curious about human culture. By the time he left, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do about the marriage contract. The next morning, David met with his lawyers again before court resumed. "I think we should try for a compromise," David told Robert. These women aren't the enemy here. They're just caught up in this mess like I am. Robert looked surprised. What kind of compromise? I don't know yet. But maybe there's a way to satisfy the treaty without forcing anyone into something they don't want. When court resumed, Judge Morrison looked tired. She had clearly spent the night reading through legal documents and treaty provisions. After careful consideration, she began, I've reached a decision. The bonding declaration is legally binding under both Earth and Zephyrian law. However, I'm going to order a unique solution. Judge Morrison cleared her throat and looked directly at David. I'm ordering a trial period of 18 months. During this time, Mr. Rodriguez and the 3 Zephyrian women will live together as a family unit to determine if this arrangement can work for everyone involved. David felt his world tilt sideways. Living together? He had barely wrapped his head around being engaged to 3 alien women, and now the judge wanted them to move in together? Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, all parties will participate in weekly cultural exchange sessions to better understand each other's customs and expectations. At the end of 18 months, we'll reconvene to determine if this arrangement should be made permanent or dissolved. The courtroom erupted in chatter. Reporters were furiously taking notes, and David could hear camera shutters clicking behind him. His phone was already buzzing with calls and messages. As everyone filed out of the courtroom, Lyra approached David. We should talk about practical arrangements, she said calmly. Where will we live? David ran his hands through his hair. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. That's definitely not going to work for 5 people. Nova joined the conversation. We have temporary housing at the cultural center, but it's not suitable for long-term living. Perhaps we could find something larger? Over the next week, David found himself house hunting with 3 alien women. It was surreal. Real estate agents didn't quite know how to handle showing properties to what the media was calling America's most unusual family. They finally found a large house in the suburbs. With 5 bedrooms and plenty of common space, David used his savings for the down payment, while the Zephyrian government helped with the monthly costs as part of their diplomatic budget. Moving day was chaos. David's belongings fit in one truck, but the Zephyrian women had brought scientific equipment, cultural artifacts, and technology that looked like it belonged in a space museum. What is that? David asked, pointing to a glowing cube that Nova was carefully placing on a shelf. It's a biological scanner, she explained. I use it to study how different environments affect living organisms. I hope you don't mind if I continue my research while we're here. David looked around his new living room, which now looked like a cross between a normal house and a science laboratory. I guess I'm getting used to unusual situations. The first few weeks were awkward. David would come home from work to find Celeste practicing something that sounded like singing, but was actually Zephyrian meditation. Or he'd walk into the kitchen to find Nova growing plants that glowed blue and definitely weren't from Earth. The cultural differences were everywhere. Zephyrians ate 2 large meals a day instead of 3 smaller ones. They slept for only 5 hours, but took 2 short naps. Their idea of entertainment was solving complex mathematical problems together. This is impossible, David complained to his friend Tony over beer one evening. I feel like I'm living with 3 brilliant aliens who think I'm some kind of primitive caveman. Tony laughed. Dude, you're living with 3 brilliant aliens. That's either the worst thing ever or the most amazing thing ever. Which is it? David thought about it. I honestly don't know anymore. The weekly cultural sessions didn't help much at first. The court-appointed counselor, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, was a specialist in interspecies relations, but even she seemed overwhelmed by the situation. Let's start with basic communication, Dr. Martinez suggested during their first session. David, tell the women something about human culture that you think is important. David thought for a moment. Well, we really value individual choice. The idea that someone can decide their own path in life is fundamental to how we think about relationships and family. Lyra looked confused. But how do you make good decisions without considering what's best for your community and family? We do consider those things, David said, but ultimately, each person gets to choose for themselves. Celeste spoke up. On our world, individual desires are balanced with collective needs. We find harmony between what we want and what serves everyone. Dr. Martinez took notes. These are very different approaches to decision-making. David, what do you think about the Zephyrian perspective? It sounds nice in theory, David admitted, but it also sounds like people might get stuck in situations they don't want, just because it's good for everyone else. Nova smiled. Like you are stuck with us? David felt his face get hot. I didn't mean it like that. We know, Lyra said gently. But you're not wrong. We're all stuck in a situation none of us chose because breaking it would cause problems for our peoples. Over the following weeks, something interesting started happening. The awkwardness began to fade as they developed daily routines. David would make coffee in the morning while Nova tended to her plants. Celeste would read human news articles and ask David to explain cultural references she didn't understand. Lyra would work on her physics equations while David reviewed legal cases, and sometimes they'd bounce ideas off each other. The media attention was constant and exhausting. Reporters camped outside their house, and every trip to the grocery store became a photo opportunity. David's law practice suffered because clients were more interested in his personal life than their legal problems. I can't take my kids to school without reporters following us, complained his neighbor, Beth. This whole situation is disrupting the entire neighborhood. David felt terrible about the impact on his neighbors, but he didn't know what to do about it. The women tried to help by giving occasional interviews to satisfy media curiosity, but it only seemed to make things worse. His family's reaction was mixed. His parents were horrified and barely spoke to him. His sister Elena was fascinated and visited often, asking the women endless questions about their home planet and technology. You know they're not actually married to you yet, right? Elena pointed out during one visit. The judge said this was just a trial period. I know, David said, but it's starting to feel real anyway. That evening, as David sat in the backyard trying to process everything, Celeste joined him. She moved quietly, like all Zephyrians did, and sat down on the grass beside him. You seem troubled, she said. David looked at her. In the moonlight, her silver eyes seemed to glow softly. I just keep thinking about how different our lives are. A few months ago, I was a normal guy with a normal job. Now I'm living with 3 aliens and half the world is watching everything I do. Celeste nodded. A few months ago, we were traveling home to see our family. Now we're stuck on a strange planet, living with a human we barely know, trying to make the best of an impossible situation. Do you hate it? David asked. Living here, I mean, being stuck with me? Celeste was quiet for a long moment. At first, I was angry, not at you, but at the situation. I felt like my life had been taken away from me. But now, she paused. Now I find myself curious about your world and your ways of thinking. Really? Yes. You approach problems differently than we do. You ask questions we wouldn't think to. Ask, it's intellectually stimulating. David smiled despite himself. You make it sound like I'm a science experiment. Celeste laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes. Perhaps we all are in a way. We're certainly learning things about each other that no one expected. The next morning, David woke up to find Nova in the kitchen, looking frustrated. She was staring at a piece of equipment that was flashing red lights. Problem? David asked. My bioscanner is malfunctioning, Nova said. It's not designed to work in Earth's atmosphere long term. Some of the components are degrading. David looked at the device. Could a human technician fix it? I know a guy who works on medical equipment. Nova looked surprised. You would help me with this? Of course. Why wouldn't I? Because it's not your equipment and fixing it doesn't benefit you directly. David poured himself coffee and thought about that. In human culture, when people live together, they help each other. It's just what you do. Nova stared at him for a moment, then smiled. That's actually quite lovely. That afternoon, David called his friend Rick, who worked for a medical device company. Rick was fascinated by the alien technology and agreed to take a look at it. "This is incredible," Rick said, examining the bioscanner. "The engineering is at least 50 years, ahead of anything we have. I can't fix the degraded components, but I might be able to build Earth-compatible replacements." Nova worked with Rick for hours, explaining how the device functioned and what each component did. David watched them collaborate and realized this was the first time he'd seen Nova truly excited about something since she'd been stuck on Earth. That evening, the three women cooked dinner together while David set the table. It was becoming their routine, and David found he actually looked forward to these shared meals. The food was always interesting, and the conversations were unlike anything he'd experienced. "Rick was very helpful today," Nova told her sisters. "He understood the technical concepts quickly, even though our engineering principles are quite different." Lyra looked thoughtful. "Perhaps there's more common ground between our species than we initially believed." "Speaking of common ground," David said, "Dr. Martinez wants us to plan some kind of joint activity for next week's session, something we can all do together." The women exchanged glances. "What did you have in mind?" Celeste asked. David grinned. "I was thinking we could try something C." 8 months had passed since David and the three Zephyrian women started living together. What began as an awkward legal arrangement had slowly transformed into something none of them had expected. They had developed routines, shared jokes, and even started planning projects together. But everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in November. David was drinking his morning coffee when Lyra rushed into the kitchen holding a communication device that was flashing urgent blue lights. "We need to talk," she said, her usually calm voice tight with worry. "All of us, right now." Nova and Celeste appeared within minutes, both looking serious. David set down his coffee cup, his stomach already knotting with anxiety. "What's wrong?" he asked. Lyra took a deep breath. "I just received a message from the High Council on our home planet. They're not happy about our situation here." "What do you mean?" David asked. Celeste spoke up. "Our people have been watching how this arrangement has developed. Some of the council members think we're becoming too human." David felt confused. "Is that bad?" Nova nodded grimly. "For traditional Zephyrians, yes. They believe we should maintain our cultural purity. The fact that we're adapting to human customs instead of converting you to our ways is seen as a failure." "They want us to return home immediately," Lyra added. "They're sending a ship to collect us next week." David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Over the past 8 months, these women had become his friends, his family in a way he never expected. The thought of them leaving suddenly felt devastating. But what about the legal arrangement? The judge's order? "The High Council doesn't recognize Earth's legal authority over Zephyrian citizens," Celeste explained. "They can override any Earth court decision." That afternoon, David called his lawyer Robert in a panic. They met at the courthouse where Robert delivered more bad news. "I've been in contact with the State Department," Robert said. "Officially, there's nothing we can do. The Zephyrians have the right to recall their own citizens. But this whole thing started because breaking the marriage contract would damage diplomatic relations," David protested. "That was when both sides wanted to maintain the arrangement," Robert replied. "Now the Zephyrian government wants their people back, and our government doesn't want to risk a diplomatic crisis by forcing them to stay." David slumped in his chair. "So that's it? After everything we've been through, they just leave?" Robert looked sympathetic. "I'm sorry, David. Sometimes the law isn't fair." That evening, David came home to find the house unusually quiet. He found the three women in the living room, sitting together and speaking in low voices in their own language. When they saw him, they stopped talking. "We've been discussing our options," Lyra said. "What options?" David asked, though he was afraid to hope. Nova looked at her sisters, then at David. "We could refuse to go back." David's heart jumped. "Really? You could do that?" "Technically, yes," Celeste said. "We're adults, and Earth has offered us asylum if we choose to stay. But it would mean we could never return home. We'd be cut off from our family, our friends, our entire world." The weight of that decision hit David hard. "I can't ask you to give up everything for this arrangement." "You're not asking," Lyra said firmly. "We're choosing." "But why?" David asked. "I mean, we get along well, but is it worth losing your whole world?" The three women exchanged looks. Finally, Celeste spoke. "David, do you remember what you said about human values? About individual choice being important?" David nodded. "Living here, we've learned what that means," Nova continued. "For the first time in our lives, we get to choose our own path instead of following what others decide for us." Lyra added, "On our world, our lives were planned from birth. We were told what to study, who to associate with, how to think. Here, we can be ourselves." David felt overwhelmed. "But your families, your careers—" "Our careers can continue here," Nova said. "Your friend Rick has already offered me a position with his company. We could do research that benefits both our peoples." "And I've been accepted to teach at the university," Lyra added. "The physics department is fascinated by Zephyrian science." Celeste smiled. "The Cultural Center has asked me to head their new interspecies relations program." David looked at each of them. "You've really thought this through." "We have," Nova said. "But there's one more thing we need to discuss." "What's that?" Lyra hesitated. "If we stay, if we choose to build a life here, we want it to be real. Not just a legal arrangement, but a genuine partnership." David's heart started beating faster. "What are you saying?" "We're saying that over these months we've come to care about you," Celeste said quietly. "Not because we're forced to, but because we want to." Nova nodded. "You've shown us kindness, patience, and respect. You've shared your world with us and helped us find our place in it. We know human marriage is different from Zephyrian bonding," Lyra said. "But maybe we can create something new. Something that works for all of us." David felt tears in his eyes. "Are you sure? This is a huge decision." "We're sure," they said together. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. The Zephyrian ship arrived, as scheduled, but instead of 3 passengers boarding it, they found a formal declaration of asylum and intent to remain on Earth. The High Council was furious. Ambassador Kira was recalled to their home planet. Diplomatic relations between Earth and the Zephyrian alliance became tense for the first time in years. But David and the women had made their choice. Judge Morrison called them back to court for an emergency hearing. The courtroom was packed with reporters and government officials. "This is highly unusual," Judge Morrison said. "The original legal requirement for this arrangement no longer exists. The Zephyrian government has withdrawn their objection to dissolving the marriage contract." David stood up. "Your Honor, we'd like to request that the contract be made permanent." The judge looked surprised. "You're sure about this, Mr. Rodriguez?" David looked at Lyra, Nova, and Celeste, who were sitting beside him. "Yes, Your Honor, we all are." "Very well," Judge Morrison said with a small smile. "In that case, I'm happy to pronounce you legally married under Earth law." The courtroom erupted in applause and camera flashes. David felt overwhelmed by the moment. After the ceremony, they all went home together. Their house, which had started as a temporary arrangement, was now permanently theirs. That evening, as they sat together in their living room, David reflected on how much his life had changed. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Giving up your old life? Lyra shook her head. Our old life was chosen for us. This life, we chose for ourselves. Nova added, Besides, we're not giving up who we are. We're becoming who we want to be. Celeste smiled. And we're doing it together. David looked around at his unusual family. A year ago, if someone had told him he'd be married to 3 alien women and happy about it, he would have thought they were crazy. But now, sitting in their shared home, planning their shared future, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. So what happens now? David asked. Now we build a life together, Lyra said. We work, we learn, we grow. We show both our peoples that different species cannot just coexist, but thrive together, Nova added. We write our own story, Celeste finished. Outside, David could hear reporters still gathered, eager for more details about this unprecedented marriage. But inside their home, all was quiet and peaceful. David smiled as he realized that what had started as the worst day of his life had led to the best decision he'd ever made. Their future was uncertain, but they would face it together. 2 years had passed since that emotional court hearing, and David's life had become something he never could have imagined. What started as an accidental marriage had grown into a genuine partnership that surprised everyone, including themselves. David woke up on a sunny Saturday morning to the smell of breakfast cooking. In the kitchen, he found Nova experimenting with a fusion of Earth and Zephyrian cooking techniques. The result was something that looked like pancakes but glowed softly blue. Should I be worried? David asked, pouring himself coffee. Nova laughed. It's perfectly safe. I'm trying to create foods that provide nutrition for both human and Zephyrian biology. This could help other mixed couples in the future. That phrase, mixed couples, had become common over the past year. David and his wives weren't the only ones anymore. 3 other human Zephyrian marriages had taken place, and several more were in the planning stages. Lyra walked into the kitchen, already dressed in her work clothes. The university called, she said. The new interspecies physics lab is ahead of schedule. We should be able to start the joint research program with the Zephyrian exiles next month. The Zephyrian exiles were 12 other Zephyrians who had chosen to stay on Earth rather than return home. They had formed a small community, and David's family had become unofficial leaders in helping them integrate into human society. Celeste appeared, carrying a tablet full of messages. We have 17 new applications for the integration program this week, she said. And the documentary crew wants to interview us again. The integration program had been Celeste's idea. It helped newly arrived aliens understand human culture while teaching humans about alien customs. What started as a small project had grown into a national program that was being copied in other countries. The documentary she mentioned was part of a series about interspecies relationships. David had been reluctant to participate at first, but he realized their story could help other people facing similar situations. Speaking of interviews, David said, I got a call from that lawyer in Tokyo yesterday. He's representing a human, woman who accidentally signed a bonding contract with a Martian delegation. All 3 women looked up with interest. The Martians had made contact with Earth just 6 months ago, and their customs were even more complex than Zephyrian ones. Are you going to take the case? Lyra asked. David nodded. I think so. We've learned a lot about making these situations work. Over breakfast, they discussed their plans for the day. It was a typical weekend for them now, a mix of work, family, time, and community activities. David's law practice had evolved into something unique. He was now Earth's leading expert in interspecies family law, helping couples navigate the complex legal and cultural challenges of mixed relationships. After breakfast, David drove to his office. The building that once housed his small immigration practice now employed 15 people and had offices in 3 cities. The waiting room was filled with couples from different species, all seeking advice on marriage contracts, adoption procedures, and integration issues. His first appointment was with Robert and Zara, a human Andromedan couple who were expecting their first child. Andromedans were an insect-like species that had recently joined the growing community of aliens on Earth. "We're worried about the birth," Zara explained through her translator device. "Andromedan children develop differently than human children." David had handled several similar cases. "We've worked with the medical team at the Interspecies Health Center. They have experience with mixed species pregnancies now." After several more appointments, David drove home for lunch. He found his wives in the backyard, setting up for a small party. Today was the 2-year anniversary of their legal marriage, and they had invited friends and family to celebrate. The guest list would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. David's parents had eventually come around and now treated their Zephyrian daughters-in-law with genuine affection. His sister Elena had become best friends with Nova and was helping her develop new medical technologies. The other guests included human-alien couples, single aliens who had become part of their extended community, and human friends who had embraced this new multicultural reality. As people began arriving, David watched the interactions with amazement. His neighbors' kids were playing with young Zephyrians, creating games that combined elements from both cultures. Human and alien adults were discussing everything from sports to science, their conversations flowing naturally despite their different backgrounds. Dr. Martinez, their original counselor, approached David with a smile. "You know, when I first met you all, I wasn't sure this arrangement could work long-term." "What changed your mind?" David asked. "You did," she said. "All of you. You didn't just adapt to each other. You created something entirely new." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, David and his wives sat together on their back porch. The house was quiet, and the stars were visible in the clear night sky. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" David asked. Celeste leaned against his shoulder. "Sometimes, but I can't imagine any other life now." "I've been thinking about our future," Lyra said. "Nova's research is advancing quickly, and my physics work is opening new possibilities for space. Travel. Celeste's integration programs are being adopted worldwide. And your legal work is helping hundreds of mixed couples," Nova added. "We're not just living together anymore. We're building something that will help others for generations." David nodded. "I got a letter yesterday from a young man in Germany. His grandfather was part of the first wave of Zephyrian refugees, and now he's engaged to a human woman. He thanked us for showing that these relationships could work." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Among those stars was the Zephyrian home world, where Lyra, Nova, and Celeste's families still lived. Communication had been limited since they chose to stay on Earth, but recent diplomatic efforts suggested that might be changing. "I have some news," Celeste said quietly. "I didn't want to mention it during the party, but I received a message from home today." David and the other women turned to look at her. "The political situation has changed," she continued. "The old High Council has been replaced by younger leaders who are more open to cultural exchange. They want to re-establish contact with the Earth Zephyrians." "What does that mean?" David asked. "It means we might be able to visit home someday," Lyra said, her voice full of hope. "And our families might be able to visit us here." Nova wiped tears from her eyes. "I never thought I'd see my parents again." David felt a complex mix of emotions. He was happy for his wives, but also worried about what renewed contact with their home world might mean for their life together. "Would you want to go back?" he asked. "Even just to visit?" "Only if you come with us," Celeste said firmly. "We're a family now. We go together or not at all." The idea of traveling to an alien world was terrifying and exciting at the same time. But David realized that if the past 2 years had taught him anything, it was that the most impossible situations could lead to the most amazing discoveries. "Well," David said with a smile, "I guess I need to get a passport that works for interplanetary travel." They all laughed, and David felt that familiar sense of contentment that had become a regular part of his life. Their story had started with confusion, legal complications, and cultural misunderstandings. But it had grown into something beautiful, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine care for each other. As they headed inside for the night, David looked back at the stars one more time. Somewhere up there was a whole universe of possibilities, of other species and cultures waiting to be discovered. If his experience had taught him anything, it was that the most unexpected encounters could lead to the most meaningful relationships. Their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. And David couldn't wait to see what came next. In the house behind them, the rooms they had filled with both human and alien artifacts told the story of their unique family. It was a story of adaptation, growth, and the discovery that love and partnership could transcend not just cultural differences, but planetary ones. Their accidental marriage had become the foundation for something much larger, a new model for how different species could not just coexist, but thrive together, creating something better than either could achieve alone.